When you think of Texas wealth, you picture oilmen in 10-gallon hats or Austin tech billionaires. But that is an illusion. The real money in Texas is quietly crossing the southern border. We are talking about highly fortified Mexican dynasties utilizing the Lone Star State as their personal offshore bank account. Today, we count down the richest Mexican families that own Texas. Number 6. The DeLeon Family. The Dallas landlord. The story of massive generational Texas wealth usually begins with legendary wildcatters striking oil deep in the desert dirt. But Fernando De Leon built a highly modern, multi-billion-dollar empire through absolute, unyielding financial engineering and real estate mastery. Raised in the border city of Matamoros, Tamaulipas, Mexico, De Leon literally crossed the international border every single day of his youth just to attend school in the United States. This grueling daily commute across the physical boundary between two distinct economies gave him an incredibly unique perspective. He recognized remarkably early on that the true, underlying currency of the border was not simply the fluctuating value of the peso or the American dollar. Rather, the true currency was the highly complex, asymmetrical translation of commercial regulation between the two nations. Utilizing his vital bilingual skills as a translator for ambitious American developers attempting to navigate the newly minted, highly complex NAFTA regulations, he gained a terrifyingly clear, foundational understanding of cross-border real estate dynamics. This early exposure was an unparalleled education in frontier economics. After completing a notoriously grueling stint working as a financial analyst at the global banking leviathan Goldman Sachs, he took his deep institutional knowledge and officially launched Leon Capital Group in Dallas right before the devastating 2008 global financial crisis tore through the world economy. While other highly leveraged legacy real estate developers panicked, catastrophically defaulted on their massive loans, and went entirely bankrupt during the unprecedented crash, De Leon actively protected his rapidly growing wealth through a strategy of predatory patience. He intelligently utilized his liquid capital to aggressively acquire deeply distressed commercial properties, massive retail centers, and sprawling apartment complexes across the entire Sun Belt for absolute pennies on the dollar. But his true, bulletproof defensive mechanism, the strategy that elevated him to the billionaire class, was his implementation of extreme vertical integration. He quickly and astutely realized that relying strictly on third-party tenants to pay the rent was a fatal, unavoidable vulnerability in traditional real estate. Instead of merely leasing his newly acquired commercial buildings to independent, highly vulnerable retail businesses, he began aggressively buying the actual operational businesses that physically occupied his real estate. The ultimate financial power move of his career was permanently transitioning from a passive commercial landlord into a highly aggressive, deeply involved corporate overlord. De Leon aggressively rolled up heavily fragmented healthcare and local service industries, successfully acquiring massive, multi-state networks of dental offices, such as the highly lucrative specialty dental brands, as well as premium, high-margin pet boarding facilities. He systematically instituted a ruthless, highly efficient corporate partnership model, where Leon Capital Group actively shares the immense equity growth directly with its retail companies. This brilliant financial architecture ensures that every single time a Texas resident gets a cavity filled, undergoes a complex medical procedure, or boards their family dog for a weekend vacation, the DeLeon family quietly collects a massive, guaranteed financial margin on both the operational service provided and the underlying physical real estate where the service occurred. He successfully created a completely closed-loop, highly impenetrable financial ecosystem. Furthermore, to guarantee his dominance, he co-founded Crexi, a massive, highly sophisticated commercial real estate data platform that directly rivals massive industry giants, effectively giving him unprecedented God-level visibility into the precise movements of the national property market. The general American public views the massive Texas real estate boom as a purely American phenomenon, incorrectly assuming it is driven entirely by wealthy coastal tech workers seeking lower state taxes. They fundamentally misunderstand the hidden architecture of the market. With a staggering personal net worth currently hovering around $2.8 billion, Fernando De Leon definitively proves that the most aggressive, highly successful players in the booming Dallas real estate scene are absolutely not legacy oil barons relying strictly on inherited dirt. He is a brilliant, self-made Mexican-American billionaire who masterfully weaponized his early, intimate understanding of cross-border commerce to fundamentally become the undisputed landlord of the sprawling Texas suburbs. While the old guard of Texas real estate operates heavily on legacy relationships and country club handshakes, De Leon operates on pure, raw data and ruthless mathematical execution. Number 5. The Gutierrez Family, the Steel Barons. To truly understand the physical, immovable infrastructure of the state of Texas, you absolutely must look directly south to the smoking, incredibly heavy industrial blast furnaces of Monterrey, Mexico. In the year 1952, a visionary entrepreneur named Cesar Gutierrez officially founded a tiny, completely unassuming warehouse operation. From that microscopic, incredibly humble beginning, his highly driven heirs, expertly led by Raul Gutierrez Muguerza, successfully transformed Grupo de Acero into an absolute, totally undisputed titan of the highly competitive global steel industry. They absolutely did not build lightweight digital software or highly speculative consumer smartphone apps. They physically forged the heavy, extremely dense, physical metal that modern human civilization fundamentally and absolutely requires to exist. Through decades of relentless industrial expansion, De Acero impressively grew into the absolute largest wire producer in the entire nation of Mexico and one of the largest global manufacturers of heavy steel wire mesh on the entire planet. They became the premier entity supplying the raw, incredibly unglamorous, yet entirely vital materials that physically construct massive modern highways, towering steel bridges, and deep commercial concrete foundations. The heavy global steel industry is notoriously, incredibly volatile, heavily and constantly subjected to the brutal, entirely unpredictable macroeconomic fluctuations of global commodity prices, complex international trade tariffs, and sudden, crippling supply chain disruptions. The brilliant Gutierrez family fiercely protected their staggering, multi-billion-dollar heavy industrial empire by perfectly executing a complete masterclass in circular economics and absolute, highly controlled vertical integration. They refused to rely on highly expensive foreign iron ore imports from deeply volatile nations. Instead, they proactively built a massive, sprawling physical infrastructure specifically dedicated entirely to the highly aggressive processing of scrap metal recycling. By strictly and totally controlling the highly complex processing of industrial waste, the operation of the massive, intensely hot steel mills, the precise engineering of the finished product plants, and the vast logistics of the distribution centers, they completely and totally insulated themselves from the chaotic, highly destructive supply chain shocks that frequently bankrupt their highly leveraged American competitors. The Gutierrez dynasty recognized incredibly early on in their corporate history that relying solely and entirely on the Mexican domestic consumer market was a massive, highly dangerous strategic vulnerability. Their ultimate multi-generational power move was systematically launching a massive, entirely silent industrial invasion of the United States, very specifically targeting the massively booming, incredibly resource-hungry construction and infrastructure sector of the state of Texas. They absolutely did not just simply export their heavy steel products across the international border. They physically, permanently anchored their massive operations directly inside America, officially establishing a massive global trade and corporate affairs headquarters to oversee their dominance. By strategically positioning massive, highly efficient physical distribution depots throughout the United States and actively, heavily lobbying the entrenched political elite in Washington, D.C., they successfully ensured their permanence. They guaranteed that the massive, multi-billion-dollar infrastructure projects rapidly expanding across the entire Sun Belt, from the towering, highly modern commercial skyscrapers rising in Austin to the sprawling, seemingly endless suburban housing tracts continuously expanding in Houston, were heavily, fundamentally, and irreversibly dependent on their specific proprietary steel products. When proud, native Texans enthusiastically drive down their incredibly smooth, newly constructed, multi-billion-dollar superhighways, or when they proudly purchase a brand new, sprawling home securely located in a master-planned suburban community, They proudly and naturally assume they are actively standing on superior American engineering built strictly and exclusively with American-forged steel. This is a massive, fundamental, and highly pervasive misunderstanding of the true North American supply chain. The actual physical reality of the situation is that the literal, unshakable skeleton of Texas, the heavy, reinforced rebar deeply buried within the concrete, the thousands of miles of heavy chain-link fences proudly protecting the sprawling historic ranches, and the high-tensile wire physically supporting the massive agricultural grid, is overwhelmingly and undeniably forged by a Mexican billionaire family. The powerful Gutierrez family definitively proves that you absolutely do not need to legally reside within the borders of Texas to literally, physically own its very foundation. Number 4. The Larrea Family. The Railroad Monarchs. The massive, incredibly hungry American industrial machine demands an infinite, completely unyielding supply of raw, highly essential commodities, and Germán Larrea Mota Velasco brilliantly positioned his powerful family to be the absolute ultimate, completely inescapable gatekeeper of that massive continental supply. Operating as the intensely secretive, highly guarded CEO of the colossal Grupo Mexico, Larrea personally commands a truly staggering, deeply intimidating personal net worth far exceeding $30 billion, officially making him the second richest man in the entire nation of Mexico. The absolute foundation of this terrifying, deeply entrenched dynastic wealth was quite literally excavated directly from the deep earth. Grupo Mexico currently stands as the third largest copper producer in the entire world. They have completely and utterly monopolized the massive extraction of this highly conductive, incredibly valuable metal that is absolutely critical to the functioning of modern high-voltage electrical grids, the massive, unstoppable global explosion of electric vehicles, and the highly complex physical architecture of global telecommunications infrastructure. However, heavy industrial mining is an incredibly dangerous, heavily regulated, and deeply politically volatile global industry. A single, unpredictable government decree regarding land rights, or a highly tragic environmental disaster, can instantly wipe out massive billions of dollars in corporate equity overnight. The brilliant Larrea family fundamentally knew that relying strictly and entirely on the physical extraction of raw copper was a massive, potentially fatal corporate vulnerability. Therefore, they actively protected their astronomical multi-generational wealth through a highly ruthless, incredibly calculated massive diversification directly into heavy logistical infrastructure. They deeply understood the basic economic truth that extracting a highly valuable commodity from the dirt is entirely, totally useless if you cannot ultimately control the physical movement and precise delivery of that commodity directly to the end buyer. Through their massive, highly capitalized corporate subsidiary, Grupo Mexico Transports, they highly aggressively acquired and systematically consolidated massive, sprawling railway networks, primarily focusing on the acquisition of Ferromex. By utterly monopolizing the actual physical steel tracks, they ensured with absolute certainty that virtually every single heavy ton of freight moving across the vast Mexican interior automatically paid them a direct, entirely non-negotiable financial toll. But the absolute ultimate flex of the powerful Larrea dynasty was successfully extending their iron, highly monopolistic grip directly into the sovereign, highly lucrative territory of Texas. In a truly breathtaking, totally unprecedented display of cross-border logistical and economic dominance, Grupo Mexico officially acquired the Texas Pacifico Transportation Company, widely known as TXPF. This was absolutely not a symbolic, minor, or passive corporate investment. TXPF completely controls the highly critical, heavy-haul freight rail lines that physically run directly from the international border crossing at Presidio, Texas, straight through the absolute beating heart of the highly lucrative Permian Basin, all the way to San Angelo. The sprawling Permian Basin is the absolute undisputed epicenter of the massive Texas oil boom, consistently producing significantly more crude oil on a daily basis than entire sovereign nations. By completely owning this highly specific, incredibly strategic physical rail corridor, the Larrea family essentially completely controls a massive, highly physical artery directly pumping vital frac sand, incredibly heavy drilling equipment, and massive agricultural products directly into the absolute most lucrative, highly critical energy field in the entire United States. The mainstream financial media consistently portrays the massive Texas oil and gas industry as the absolute ultimate symbol of American energy independence. Supposedly entirely controlled by legendary, highly romanticized homegrown wildcatters and extremely wealthy Houston corporate executives. They are totally oblivious to the underlying, highly complex logistical reality. You simply cannot physically execute a massive, multi-billion-dollar fracking operation deep in the desert without massive, highly continuous quantities of highly specialized frac sand and extremely heavy drilling machinery. The Larrea family absolutely dictates the precise speed, the exact cost, and the physical delivery of those highly vital, entirely necessary components. Proud Texans deeply think they completely control their own massive oil boom. The Larrea family definitively proves that true, completely untouchable, multi-generational wealth is absolutely not found merely in drilling the highly volatile oil well. It is ultimately found in completely owning the literal physical steel tracks that the massive oil industry fundamentally needs to survive. Number 3. The Fernandez and Arizpe families. The liquid monopoly. The absolutely most stable, completely unshakable, multi-generational fortunes in the entire global economy are remarkably not built on highly complex, rapidly changing software or deeply volatile, highly unpredictable raw commodities. They are brilliantly, methodically built on sugar, water, and absolute, highly lucrative, government-sanctioned corporate monopolies. The fascinating story of this massive corporate hegemony officially begins back in the year 1926 with the initial founding of the Vidriera Monterrey Company. However, the true, massive explosion of deep dynastic wealth primarily occurred through the highly strategic, incredibly complex, blood-bound consolidation of previously independent, highly fragmented regional Mexican Coca-Cola bottlers. The incredibly powerful Arizpe, Barragan, Fernandez, and Grossman families brilliantly executed a truly unprecedented massive corporate merger in the year 2001, officially forming what is now widely known as the corporate Leviathan Arca Continental. They successfully transformed a highly loose, incredibly fragmented collection of highly localized regional distributors into the absolute second-largest Coca-Cola bottler in all of Latin America, concurrently becoming one of the absolute most powerful, highly capitalized beverage conglomerates on planet Earth. The massive Arca Continental Syndicate fiercely protects their multi-billion-dollar beverage empire through the terrifyingly lucrative, highly heavily guarded architecture of the official Coca-Cola franchise model. In the highly secretive global beverage industry, the massive Coca-Cola Company headquarters located in Atlanta, Georgia, simply provides the highly concentrated proprietary flavor syrup. It is the completely independent, heavily franchised regional bottlers who actually possess the massive factories to manufacture, highly package, and physically distribute the final product directly to the consumer. By successfully securing the highly exclusive, entirely legally binding franchise rights for incredibly massive geographic territories, these brilliant Mexican families established a completely impenetrable, highly lucrative corporate moat. Absolutely no other corporate entity is legally permitted to physically manufacture or distribute a Coca-Cola branded product within their strictly defined, legally enforced borders. They successfully created a highly localized, heavily fortified, entirely private tax on the basic hydration and caloric intake of massive millions of completely captive regional consumers. For many highly lucrative decades, Arca Continental completely and utterly dominated the massive, thirsty consumer markets of Mexico, Ecuador, and Peru. But in the pivotal year of 2017, they brilliantly executed a highly historic, incredibly aggressive cross-border corporate invasion that permanently, fundamentally altered the massive consumer economy of the state of Texas. In a truly landmark multi-billion-dollar transaction, the powerful syndicate successfully secured the completely exclusive franchising distribution rights to the entire southwestern United States, officially creating the massive corporate entity known as Coca-Cola Southwest Beverages, or CCSWB. They absolutely did not just simply buy the highly lucrative distribution rights on a piece of legal paper. They immediately poured a staggering highly impressive $250 million of liquid capital into physically constructing a massive, highly advanced, state-of-the-art 1 million square foot bottling and distribution facility directly in Houston, Texas. It was incredibly the very first brand new Coca-Cola plant successfully built in the entire United States in well over a decade. This massive facility wasn't just a simple, basic factory. It was a highly advanced technological marvel, entirely capable of continuously pumping out massive millions of heavy cases of sugary beverages with terrifying, highly efficient automated precision. When a typical Texas family casually walks into a local H-E-B grocery store, a small neighborhood convenience shop, or enthusiastically attends a classic Friday night high school football game and innocently purchases a classic Coca-Cola, a Sprite, or a simple Dasani water, they naturally and fundamentally assume they are actively supporting a classic, highly iconic American corporation. This is a massive, deeply entrenched, highly persistent consumer illusion. The absolute, undeniable financial reality is that the entire, massive manufacturing margin, the highly lucrative distribution profit, and the final retail markup of that simple transaction seamlessly flow directly out of the state of Texas and directly into the heavily guarded, highly secretive family trusts of the powerful Monterrey elite. By permanently holding the completely exclusive bottling rights, the powerful Arca Continental Syndicate essentially functions exactly as a highly private, incredibly efficient tax agency, entirely legally mandated to strictly collect a financial toll on absolutely every single ounce of Coca-Cola consumed across the vast, sprawling expanse of the Lone Star State. Number 2. The Aramburuzabala Family, the private equity queen. The truly immense, heavily scrutinized wealth of Maria Asuncion Aramburuzabala is absolutely legendary in financial circles, deeply and fundamentally rooted in the absolute, totally undeniable global domination of the highly lucrative commercial alcohol trade. Her visionary grandfather, a highly driven Spanish immigrant, was a primary co-founder of the legendary Grupo Modelo, the deeply iconic, highly successful brewing behemoth, entirely responsible for globally introducing highly popular brands like Corona and Modelo Especial directly to the thirsty world. As the primary, highly powerful heiress to this truly staggering, highly profitable brewing empire, Maria Asuncion absolutely did not simply rest quietly on her massive inherited laurels, nor did she ever allow powerful male corporate executives to dictate her financial future. Instead, she highly aggressively took the firm reins of the massive corporate board and brilliantly positioned the entire massive brewing company for the absolute ultimate, truly historic global liquidity event. In the highly historic year of 2013, she brilliantly orchestrated, aggressively negotiated, and successfully finalized the complete sale of Grupo Modelo directly to the massive multinational brewing conglomerate AB InBev for an absolutely earth-shattering, highly staggering sum of $20 billion. This single, incredibly monumental corporate transaction instantly minted her as the absolute wealthiest woman in the entire nation of Mexico, providing her with a truly terrifying, highly liquid war chest of purely liquid capital. Inheriting a massive, highly successful physical corporate empire is certainly one thing, but successfully and entirely converting it directly into massive liquid cash and brilliantly protecting it from the severe ravages of inflation, highly destructive currency devaluation, and constant political instability requires absolute, totally undeniable financial genius. Following the highly monumental historic corporate sale, Maria Asuncion, working closely alongside her highly trusted mother and sister, heavily fortified their massive new wealth by officially establishing Trisalia Capital, a highly symbolic name that directly translates to three allies. She systematically, methodically, and incredibly ruthlessly diversified her massive billions entirely away from the highly volatile, deeply unpredictable Mexican peso and completely away from the highly dangerous single-sector risk of physical alcohol production. She successfully transformed her highly secretive family office into a highly sophisticated, completely apex private equity firm, highly aggressively targeting ultra-secure, completely dollar-denominated physical assets across the entire globe, specifically to strictly shield her powerful family's immense purchasing power for the entire next century. This was absolutely not a quiet, passive, or overly conservative wealth preservation strategy. It was an incredibly aggressive, highly predatory global capital deployment. The absolute ultimate, highly visible manifestation of Trisalia Capital's raw financial power was a massive, highly calculated, multi-billion-dollar pivot directly into the highly lucrative commercial real estate and highly complex technology infrastructure of the United States, acting with a hyper-focus completely on the massively booming Sunbelt and the highly lucrative state of Texas. She brilliantly recognized that the physical, highly industrial brewing of beer was fundamentally a 20th century fortune. The true, highly scalable 21st century fortune belonged exclusively and entirely to the massive landlords of the new digital economy. Consequently, she aggressively poured hundreds of massive millions of dollars into directly acquiring massive, highly exclusive, Class A multifamily real estate developments completely across Texas, while simultaneously highly intelligently investing incredibly heavily in the massive subterranean data centers and highly complex telecommunications networks that entirely, fundamentally power the modern American internet. She seamlessly, brilliantly transitioned from simply providing the physical beverages of the working class to completely owning the highly advanced, completely physical architecture absolutely required by the modern tech elite. She deeply, fundamentally understands that while highly popular consumer goods are always vulnerable to rapidly changing cultural trends, the massive, humming server farms and the highly coveted luxury housing absolutely required by the massive Texas tech boom are absolute, completely non-negotiable physical necessities. The American public overwhelmingly and completely incorrectly views the massive success of Corona beer, especially its absolute, totally undeniable domination of the highly competitive American imported beer market, as a massive, complete triumph of global corporate marketing orchestrated by AB InBev. What they completely, entirely, and fundamentally misunderstand is the true, completely hidden victor of that highly historic corporate transaction. The brilliant Aramburuzabala family successfully utilized the massive American thirst for imported beer to perfectly extract staggering billions of dollars directly from the highly liquid global market, completely and entirely liquidating their massive operational risk at the absolute perfect peak of its financial valuation. They successfully took that massive, highly liquid pile of cash and entirely quietly crossed the border, brilliantly leveraging it to highly successfully become one of the absolute most powerful, completely invisible landlords operating in the entire state of Texas. They absolutely no longer simply sell a physical product you drink. They entirely quietly, highly securely own the very physical infrastructure where you proudly live and actively work. Number 1. The Garza Sada Dynasty, the Monterrey Syndicate. To truly and fully comprehend the absolute ultimate apex of staggering Mexican wealth actively operating within the borders of Texas, you must absolutely look at a massive collective, incredibly heavily fortified familial dynasty rather than focusing on a single, isolated wealthy individual. The highly powerful Garza Sada family is the complete, totally undeniable royal bloodline of the highly industrial city of Monterrey, Mexico. Their massive, entirely sprawling corporate empire officially began back in the year 1890 with the highly successful founding of the legendary Cuauhtémoc Brewery. But they absolutely, entirely did not stop at simply brewing beer. They astutely, brilliantly recognized that to truly, completely dominate an entire regional economy, you must absolutely own every single, highly critical node of the entire physical supply chain. Consequently, they massively expanded their operations entirely into heavy glass manufacturing specifically to successfully make their own bottles, deeply into heavy steel manufacturing strictly to physically build their own massive factories, and heavily into the highly lucrative retail sector simply to sell their own finished products. This completely relentless, highly aggressive, multi-generational corporate expansion directly birthed colossal, highly dominant multinational conglomerates, completely like Alpha, and the massive FEMSA. FEMSA, in highly specific particular, highly successfully operates OXXO, the absolute largest and totally most dominant, inescapable chain of local convenience stores in all of Latin America, consistently generating massive tens of billions of dollars in highly reliable, recurring, daily consumer revenue. They absolutely didn't just passively participate in the growing Mexican economy. They completely, aggressively engineered it from the ground up. The massive, highly influential Garza Sada Dynasty fiercely protected their staggering, almost incalculable wealth through an incredibly intricate, highly complex, and nearly entirely impenetrable system of highly strategic familial cross-holdings and deeply fortified institutional fortification. The highly elite, incredibly wealthy families of Monterrey regularly and strategically intermarry, constantly sit on each other's highly powerful corporate boards, and fiercely, relentlessly protect their massive collective regional financial interests against both highly aggressive foreign corporate competitors and the highly unpredictable, sometimes hostile Mexican federal government itself. Furthermore, to guarantee their multi-generational dominance, they successfully established the prestigious Tecnológico de Monterrey, widely known simply as Tech, which is universally and widely considered to be the absolute MIT of Latin America. By massively funding and entirely directly controlling the absolute premier, highest-level educational institution in the entire country, they highly successfully established a permanent, entirely elite, high-level corporate talent pipeline, completely ensuring that the absolute brightest, most highly educated engineering and sharpest business minds in all of Mexico are systematically funneled directly into their massive corporate empires, successfully creating a massive, entirely impenetrable intellectual moat around their wealth. The absolute ultimate, highly supreme, completely undeniable power move of the massive Monterrey syndicate was the incredibly silent, entirely absolute economic and real estate colonization of South Texas. Deeply recognizing the inherent, highly dangerous political and intense economic volatility of the overarching Mexican state, these ultra-wealthy, highly powerful industrial families strictly required a highly geographically close, completely politically stable, and entirely safe haven for their massive troves of liquid capital. They strategically, highly deliberately chose the sprawling city of San Antonio, Texas. Over the past 3 highly lucrative decades, the powerful Garza Sada family and their highly elite, heavily moneyed peers have quietly poured entirely untold, staggering billions of dollars directly into the highly booming Texas real estate market. They have aggressively, systematically purchased massive, highly sprawling commercial tracts of land, incredibly high-end luxury retail centers, and utterly massive, highly exclusive residential housing developments. Their silent financial influence is so absolutely totally dominant across the region that ultra-exclusive, incredibly heavily guarded, highly wealthy neighborhoods located within San Antonio, very specifically such as the Dominion and the sprawling Sonterra, are frequently, openly referred to by local real estate insiders simply as Monterrey North. They are actively, heavily funding massive, towering commercial office towers, permanently anchoring highly elite, incredibly expensive medical centers, and successfully establishing highly secretive, heavily fortified family offices quietly throughout the sprawling, beautiful Texas Hill Country. They are essentially, effectively establishing a completely shadow capital, a highly secure, incredibly heavily fortified financial backup generator, specifically designed to protect their massive Mexican empires. The mainstream American media consistently, repeatedly, and almost entirely attributes the massive, highly explosive economic growth and the totally massive real estate boom of South Texas strictly to internal American domestic migration, highly publicized tech industry relocations, and the massive local oil boom. This is a completely massive, incredibly naive, and fundamentally incorrect economic oversight. The massive physical and incredible economic expansion of the city of San Antonio and the surrounding beautiful Texas Hill Country is highly heavily, completely fundamentally subsidized by the massive, highly strategic capital flight of Mexico's absolute most powerful, highly wealthy industrial oligarchs. The incredibly powerful Garza Sada Dynasty and the highly secretive Monterrey elite absolutely do not merely visit the state of Texas for simple, casual weekend luxury shopping trips. They systematically, highly effectively utilize the entire state completely as their personal, incredibly highly fortified offshore bank account. They treat the massive Texas real estate market exactly as a highly secure sovereign wealth fund, proving entirely definitively that the absolute most powerful, highly wealthy families in Mexico do not just simply do business with Texas, They completely quietly, highly systematically own it. These dynasties prove that true power recognizes no borders. Which of these empires holds the most absolute control? Let me know below. If you want to understand who really runs the world, like and subscribe to Global Status. We track the money.